where are you guys stuck at then? Stuck.
So I'm in Mexico. I'm in Playa del Carmen. We hosted a Worldschooling conference here. We do two every year for families that travel. So they're like temporary hubs where all the families come together and we share stories and support and tools and do our own conference sessions and so forth. And spring was here in Playa del Carmen, and we're meant to be in October in Hoi An, Vietnam. Doesn't look like that's going to be happening either. It's just like the, you know, for somebody who doesn't travel, okay, great, we'll just wait this out. But for somebody whose travel is their life, it's just like, what do I do with myself? You know, but we'll get through it. It's not that bad. We'll get.
Can you share a link to the conference?
Sure.
The last 2 years, we've been kind of just winterizing where we live because we live in a cabin in the woods and going wherever in the world. We went to 3 countries this past winter and we ended up cutting it short. So we're not going to do it full time, right? But, you know, the winter's the best time. And I can still work online if there's Wi-Fi and keep on going with life. Like, it's interesting. But the conference sounds like it'd be right up my son's alley.
Yeah, they're great. They're great. So it's like 7 minutes after. I think
I
we
get
should
started.
What do you think? So, all right. Could everybody type in the chat window sort of a quick, you know, what you're looking for in this session? Are you looking for inspiration? Are you looking for tools? Are you looking
Information?
Yeah, or anything else. And that way we'll be able to share those things. Also, let us know if you are an educator and you'd like more resources or more focus on how to educate others, or if this is for you and your family, because that's going to look different too. Oh, I just keep wanting to go and let people in. Thank you so much, Alex, for doing that. Okay. Fantastic. Inspiration, resource, tools. All right, does everybody, do you have a general idea of who we are? Have you seen our TEDx talk? Have you followed any of the stuff that we've done? Or is this brand new? Is the world of Worldschooling brand new to you? How to incorporate Worldschooling into our, okay, fantastic. Okay. Okay, teacher, former principal.
Hi, Barry.
Okay, and by all means, don't feel like you have to stay muted. If you want to, I would prefer to engage in a conversation versus us doing a formal presentation. I guess I'll just start really quick then and let you know who we are. I'm Lainie and my son Miro. Quick, just real briefly, in 2008, we're from California, 2008, if you remember, the economy crashed and that changed our lives completely. I owned a business at the time and I was overworked and overstressed, and my young 9-year-old Miro, who's not young or 9, oh, you're still young, but he used to say to me all the time that I was always working and that I would never spend time with him. And as a business owner, my mind, you know, I thought I was doing everything that I was meant to be doing, and I was providing a life. I was, you know, creating a future. I was laying down the foundation for years to come, but I was missing out on the present. And when the economy crashed and I knew that I was not going to be bringing back my staff the next year, I owned a branding agency, a boutique branding agency. I looked at Miro and I said, why don't you tell the rest of the story, darling?
She looked at me one night in the home office when everybody had gone away, and she said, let's go have an adventure. She said, let's leave this behind. Let's go live a life together and actually spend time with one another. And of course, you know, me being a 9-year-old who was fed up with my experience in my local school, and with, you know, who struggled with the strained relationship that me and my mom had, I said yes, emphatically. There was no way around that. I was all in. And so that's exactly what we did. Over the next 6 months, we took it upon ourselves to sell everything that we owned, to give up our loft, to rehome our dog. We did everything. We moved really quickly. And before we knew it, we touched down in Mexico, which was our first spot. And that's where we began our experience with world schooling, with world travel. And that's where we started this part of our lives. So that's kind of what it was. The original idea was that we would leave the States only for a year, a single year, because that seemed like the, the reasonable thing to do. And then come back and resume our normal lives. And over this year, we were supposed to travel all the way from Mexico down to Argentina. That was the idea. And it's been 11 years since then, and we're still traveling. 12, almost 12 years, and we're still traveling. And we have also not yet made it to Argentina. So there's been a lot that's happened in between then and now. But we kind of fell into this all very accidentally, organically, I guess you could say. And that is basically our story in a nutshell. And we'll go over, I'm sure, all the other things that occurred, but that'll give you an idea of who we are and what we've been doing for the last decade or so.
So over that period of time, we've become, and I'm going to skip forward and jump around, and we don't have a ton of time together. So I just, part of the mission that gave meaning to to our lives was to advocate for this as a lifestyle, and we've worked tirelessly to bring world schooling into the conversation of alternative education. Now, we fell into and discovered that we were doing our own form of education, and it was called unschooling. And in fact, it looked like radical unschooling, and that dove us down into all of these different areas. And I could talk about how that looks, but there's so many experts at this conference talking about self-directed education. But I will say, if you have questions about that and how it looked for us, we're happy to answer anything. But what I'd like to focus on specifically is what we call world schooling. Now, world schooling, like I said, I've worked tirelessly to bring this into the conversation. I've been, we've done all sorts of academic studies with, in collaboration with academics. We have been quoted in Carrie McDonald's book on unschooling. We've spoken at multiple conferences around the world over the last 10 years about this. So we've done our job to try and bring this into the consciousness in order that people recognize this as a legitimate form of learning. Now, it's more than just learning though. So it's lifestyle, it's immersive travel in some cases, but doesn't have to be. And it's about family culture. There's also elements tied into world schooling with location independence, and some, go down the path of digital nomading, and that spans the whole sort of, realm of everything that's in our universe. It's not just education. From our perspective, we're advocates for combining unschooling or self-directed learning, family culture, cultural immersion, and worldviews into world schooling. Miro, can you talk a little bit about what we've done with maybe some of the team retreats in terms of how we express that with other people?
Yeah, well, just the concept of worldviews is really, really important. And it's actually something that we cover during our, like she said, during our team retreats, during our family gatherings. And I teach an online class pretty much about the topic to young children. So we really put a lot of value on this concept of worldviews because we believe that as our world is becoming more and more interconnected with, technology, with communications, basically it is our responsibility to understand the perspectives of other people, whether they're coming from a different culture or a different geographical location. So worldviews are basically the different ways that people view the world. And I always explain it to children as though you're looking through a series of different lenses, right? And those lenses could be anything from your geographical location, where you're from, your gender, all of those things, right? And they all get wrapped into that. Now, learning through all of these different worldviews is also something that has immense value. And that's a huge part of world schooling. It's the ability to learn and explore a different topic or subject from somebody else's perspective. And that's really one of the main reasons why we do world school. It's to expand our perspectives and to expand our worldviews. So I would say that that's pretty much, the importance of worldviews right there.
Yeah. um, and again, there was a comment, and I'm starting to look at comments a little bit. Alex just said, well, I'm a young adult and I want to be able to do this too. And just because we're focusing on family and we're focusing on children or teens doesn't mean it excludes anybody. We are indeed lifelong learners. And I know that there were some requests for tools. Um, I think we'll get into that near the end because there's a lot of tools that you could dig into. Worldviews, as Miro was saying, is super important, and it really depends on a conversation. And the reason why I would say that worldviews is one of the first entry into world schooling is, number one, it creates conversation in your family unit or in your community or with those whom you're traveling with, but it also opens you up as an individual learner to expand your own worldview by considering somebody else's perspective. And the example we like to give is when we were, several years ago in Ecuador, and we were with a group of teens, and we were on the coast of Ecuador. And one of the days we spent with the fishermen, and they brought in these huge hulls and the nets onto the beach, and they're chopping the heads off the fish and they're gutting them there, and there's blood all over the shore, and there's an amazing amount of commerce going back and forth, and it's just like this crazy market on the shore. And it was such a beautiful thing to watch how commerce and everything was done. The next day we worked with a conservationist, and their perspective was very different. Now, all of the people that we were working with were Ecuadorians, and each of them had their particular lenses through which they viewed the world. But each lens, as it got colored by their own personal experiences, ethics, and preferences, it made the way that they experienced each of those experiences differently. And as a human being, we respond based on our own preferences as well. And learning to set those aside and consider other perspectives, as we did actively with the fishermen, with the conservationists. We worked with children or teachers who taught children in the village, which had a totally different perspective. Each of these perspectives came with a whole new point of view, and it helped us to understand a broader picture of what was happening in this little fishing town in Ecuador. It also helped us to understand more about our own filters, preferences, and biases, and it gave us the language in which to question those things. So experience itself allows us to go deeper, but creating the space between the reaction, preference, thought, worldview, and understanding and respecting other people's preferences and worldviews allows us as humanity, human beings, like I'm going to get really big here. It allows us to move into a space where we can actually create a peaceful planet. which I think is so important right now. We're talking about creating connection or bridges instead of, you know, putting barriers up between our differences.
Now, my mom is a very big picture, like abstract, idealist kind of person. So a lot of the phrases that she might be throwing around might sound really big, but at the end of the day, really, it just comes down to use more like well cemented educational terms. Um, we're also talking about things like soft skills, right? Or what people know as soft skills. And I really don't like that phrase because I think they're actually essential skills, but that is what they're referred to as. It's basically through these world schooling experiences, through exploring somebody else's perspective and having these conversations, we're also able to exercise things like compassion, things like cultural awareness, things like cooperation, right? And that is another really significant part that goes into not only the education, but the ethos of world schooling, wherever it is applied.
So we've done lots of research and we've written reports about the ethos behind what it means to be a world schooler. And this is sort of separate from the educational tools, which we'll get into next. But in terms of ethos, there does come responsibility with world schooling as a world schooler. And that means that you are considering culture, cultural immersion, what your presence is doing on the particular culture. There's all sorts of issues surrounding cultural appropriation, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. So those are things that we need to really be aware of and educate ourselves from a well-rounded perspective when we're interacting with another culture. There's also, Miro, you want to talk about the ecological concerns?
Of course. I mean, when we're talking about, especially when we're including travel within the mix and within this definition of world schooling, there definitely are a number of ethical implications that you have to be aware of when we travel. And some of those are cultural, some of those can affect how local cultures develop and it can alter their path. Some of those can be ecological, like my mom just said, whether it's through carbon emissions from that travel itself, whether it's from the implications of consumeristic travel, and then we can also there's also a number of effects that come down to the economy of local places, the political structures of local places. So I mean, that in of itself is such a long conversation. That could be its own talk
And it
entirely. Actually,
actually
and we
was.
actually, yeah, we do that as a talk. Um, so we're just going to touch on that now as something to be aware of. But that really is such a deep conversation when it comes to world schooling. There are things that you need to be aware of.
And like you said, wanted to make sure that we brought that up. So we're not running around the planet, unaware of our privilege, and we're not running around the planet trying to make people serve us, so we could learn. It's just there is an absolute, if you choose world schooling, even world schooling from your own home, which means bringing other cultures into your lives, you've got to do it with the utmost respect. You've got to absolutely be aware of worldviews and how worldviews are playing on the interaction, and be gracious. There's a lot that goes into world schooling along the lines of ethics.
Well,
Did you want to add
let's
to that?
dive deeper. Well, let's dive deeper into something that you just mentioned, which was attempting to world school from home and what that process could look like. Because I've seen that a few people within the chat have displayed interest in that.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to bring up next in terms of tools. So again, as we've been working to bring world schooling into the alternative education conversation, it's important to realize that world schooling can be done from your home. Um, Again, world schooling is utilizing the world around you as the rich classroom to learn from. So that means that it's infinite. And as an unschooler who world schools or a self-directed learner family who world schools, we took world schooling as an immense opportunity to go down and dig down into some rabbit holes. So one of the things that I want to talk about is passion-based learning. And passion-based learning, as you know, is at the root of most self-directed learning principles. So if you are a family who is interested in the world around us, perhaps one strategy would be as a family to choose and focus a particular region or culture or even a country. And everybody in your family then can pursue something within their own passions, whether it's fashion, music, food, architecture, it doesn't matter. But the thing that ties it together is that exploration. And when you're doing this from your own home, you've got the World Wide Web as one of your rich tools. And it's a tool, obviously, unlike any tool that was around when I was growing up. But in addition, you've got access in most communities to all kinds of cultural ethnic food. You've got access to movies. You've got access to news and art. And to come together either as one of the other things, again, as I'm interrupting myself, that we're really passionate about is learning in community or social learning, because that provides, in our opinion, one of the richest exposures, multifaceted exposures to so many different aspects or worldviews that you would have never considered. Miro, do you want to touch a little bit on where travel through Peru brought you to learn about myth in Greece?
That was a rabbit hole in of itself. So, and that actually segues pretty nicely from the topic of passion-based learning, right? And encouraging this pursuing of your passions, because I was exposed to ancient history and I was exposed to mythology over the course of a few years of travel as a young child, and that was something that I found myself deeply passionate about and just fascinated by. And it wasn't necessarily because I was interested in it at that time, because there were many cases when my mom dragged me off to, some pre-Columbian ruins that I maybe wasn't interested in at the time. But by proximity to her interest, and that was her passion. So by proximity to her passion, I ended up discovering a fascination for the ancient history of another region of the world. And that has developed into something so huge. It's gone from ancient history to mythology to world religions to how history translates into modern culture, and that's really influenced a lot of my learning. And that, I would say, that whole sphere of topics in of itself is also another really great way to interact with a culture, which is through their history, through their belief systems, and that's something that you can really do from anywhere. That information is readily available. And of course, it's not exactly the same as interacting with the people who necessarily may hold those beliefs. But on some level, we can all interact with those cultures on that level. And that's something that has so much inherent value. So.
One of the things that we absolutely fell in love with, and we learned about this on our travels, and every single country that we go to, we seek out a person of this particular profession. We have learned that oral history, story, and myth is told by every culture. And we have learned that creation stories are in every culture. And through those particular practices, it helps us to connect to the deep history of how a culture evolved from whatever that particular culture was to present day. And I cannot stress enough that if you are exploring a particular culture or region or country, now we know them as country, look into the oral history if you can. Reach out, become a researcher, and uncover and discover as much as you can from the perspective of those who live in those countries. Um, One of the things that I was very passionate about early on in my career before we started World Schooling was the idea of media literacy, and how this relates to World Schooling is really important. We as travelers, whether we're traveling from our living room or traveling in the world, we need to be able to discern what is the story told by those that live in the country and what's written about them by, and I don't want to put my fingers up and do the air quotes in disrespect, but I want to say academics. We know as Westerners, most of us, not everybody here on this call is a Westerner, but we do know that Westerners have dominated the academics of recording history and anthropology and so forth throughout the years. And we do know that that is one particular perspective. And again, going back to worldviews, once we learn who the worldview is coming from, we know how to frame the story. And those of us that are world schooling, and if the world is our classroom, we need to be able to discern what information is out there. I remember, do you remember when we presented in Athens, Miro? And we were talking about learning all the alternative history around the Incas and the pre-Incas and the pre-Incas in Peru, and how we were questioned by a gentleman in the audience who was appalled that I made space for all of these stories and beliefs to live side by side. And his argument, we were presenting, to a full room. And his argument was, well, you're not learning the truth if you're allowing everything to live in the same universe. And that to me was really interesting. And I've thought about this. We gave this talk years ago, and I still think about that as something to consider. All of us have, again, goes back to world views. We all have our own world views and our own perspectives. And if we haven't created that space or loosened up that belief, we can get somewhat argumentative or even violent in our reactions to preserving these thoughts and ideas. So again, I always say, especially when we work with the teens, that the journey through the outer worlds is always a reflection of our inner worlds. And whatever is going on out there gives us the kind of the reference to talk about what's happening inside. I would say world schooling changed us considerably from who we were when we started out traveling and to who we've become as citizens of the globe. That to me, I mean, they're two different people. They're the four different people. You're right, Miro? Yeah. Anyway, we've been yakking. We have a little bit more that we wanted to talk about. Go ahead.
Why don't we jump in and answer? I'm seeing a couple of questions in the chat that are asking about, some more of the logistical details of what our life has looked like and how we managed to make it work, right? There's questions that have to do with like language barriers, right? And stuff like that. So I guess I could just answer that one right off the bat. I learned Spanish. So we spent, over the last 11, 12 years, the majority of that time has been spent in Latin America, or at least in Spanish-speaking countries. And over the years, I learned Spanish without any form of, I actually never took a Spanish class. I learned Spanish purely through immersion. Over the course of years of practicing and interacting with locals and saying words wrong and being corrected, I eventually picked up Spanish. to the point where I speak fluently as a local, and I actually I don't
Without
have
an
an American
accent.
accent. So that was something that happened very organically and naturally. Um, and it's been more difficult when we visit places like Thailand, for example, which has a notoriously difficult language. But we always attempt to try and cross that gap as much as we can. And, I guess we just make do. Um, I will say it is a huge privilege, having your native language be English, because the truth is, most places you go in the world, you will always find somebody who can communicate with you on some level, right? So that is something to be acknowledged. But as far as language goes, that's pretty much been our story. Qué divertido.
Miro,
Yeah.
there's a request from Robert to expand on how we're different because of our travels, and he wants to specifically know what it is to be responsible as a member of the world community. So why don't you answer that, speak to that?
Well, I'll speak first to the question of, I guess, the difference in our experience, right? And I feel like world schooling has, in some ways, I mean, I'm not also going to say that it's also been purely positives, right? Every lifestyle has its challenges and its ups and downs. Um, but world schooling has, in so many ways, opened us up to people of all backgrounds, of all walks of life, and it's really allowed us to engage and interact with those people. But at the same time, it has made us inherently different, in that I feel I feel very different to the majority of people that live in my own home country, my own original country, which is the U.S. And I feel, in some ways, because of the different life and the different experiences that I have had over my childhood and my formative years, I feel in some ways maybe somewhat alienated from my own culture. And I think that that's a symptom that a lot of third culture kids experience at some point in their upbringing. It has to do with trying to find your own identity and your own place in the world. And I think to some degree, that's true of my mom as well. I think that her perspective and her, reality has also shifted as a result of the experiences that we've had over the last 10 years. So in that way, I do think exploring things and having experienced so many different perspectives also changes the conversation for you. And that can be really difficult in some circles, because in some circles, it's hard to have a conversation if you don't share the same homogenous perspective. So that is definitely something to consider. And as far as it goes for our duty as like global citizens, right, and our responsibility, um, there's a famous quote that goes something like, "It's harder to drop bombs on people that you know." So by creating so many more personal experiences, and by um, having those firsthand experiences, I really do feel like we are able to actually have a deeper capacity for caring and a deeper capacity for compassion. And of course, in an ideal world, I would like to say that we can just, as humans, you know, create that. But it is true that we are personal creatures. If something that we have experienced does inherently have a greater emotional and personal value to us, and that's just part of our psychology, I suppose. But I do think that just by being able to, or just by having had those experiences and having met all these people, and having known so many different ways to be, I think that innately gives us, as humans, maybe a deeper capacity for compassion. And that's something that anybody who is willing or interested in creating that for themselves, they can have that. I think that is probably the way that we are able to, hopefully try and create a more peaceful world, whether that's through discourse or conversations, or even through, the actual physical space that we all inhabit.
I would say that the focus of our journey over the last 12 years has become, it didn't start out this way, but it has become to inspire others to realize that they can do whatever it is they want to do, and that they can live life on their terms and learn on their terms and be a family on their terms. And again, like Miro said, we didn't set out to do any of this, but discovered so much about ourselves along the way. We've been an open book about everything. There is a question here, and I don't want to dodge it. The question is, how do you make money? I mean, that was basically it from Jordan. Curious how language barriers and how you deal with finances. And trust me, finances are a huge question every conference we go to. Just super quick, our background is I owned a business. I was doing quite well when the economy crashed in 2008. So I had a little bit of savings, and that propelled us on our first year of travels. And during that time, because I had a background in advertising and basic consumerism, I was burnt out on the whole concept of consumerism. And so when we started to step into the world and step into cultures that were in some perspectives still developing, we realized that we had to really change our relationship to money, and we had a very limited amount of money. I mean, seriously, we were living our first year of travel, we were living on about 2,000 US dollars a month. And we soon discovered that we didn't actually need that much, because we weren't purchasing things. We weren't living as tourists. We started to immerse ourselves in countries and really live in the local villages and participate and immerse ourselves in daily life, because we wanted to really learn. That was our passion. That was our purpose. And that was giving and feeding so much to ourselves. And when the money ran out, we realized that we had to do something else in terms of making a living. So I did a little bit of writing, a little bit of consulting, and guess what? For the next 8 years, we lived on half of that. And our relationship to what is possible, what is comfortable, what you believe that you can live on, changed drastically. There is no way in this world anybody could ever accuse us of being well off. Our bank accounts are quite minimal to in response to that, like seriously. But we have a different relationship to what we need. And early on, we had to quickly decipher between needs and preferences, and that was huge. In terms of the logistics, everything's done online, banking's online, we now work online, we still don't make a lot of money, we're okay, we're just okay, but it's not the priority as it used to be in the American dream.
And that is basically, it's just resulted in a shift of our priorities. We've basically decided that having what we used to have back when we lived in the US is not as important as the flexibility, right? So we work online, and the trade-off for that is we don't make nearly as much, but we can do it from anywhere. Part of our work has to do with travels when it comes to the retreats and the summits. We don't make very much on them, but part of the payment is that travel is included in that, right? So we have basically, over the years, very gradually, and really unintentionally, I would say it happened rather naturally, we shifted our priorities as we started to see we don't need as much. We basically have gone from the need to be comfortable to the need to need, really.
Yeah.
So
There's a question from, I know this is not the person's name, my Mac, who's asking about what it looks like when kids from other countries interact. Now, Miro's a teacher of kids from other countries, and actually you're not a teacher, you facilitate a Worldschooling club, basically, where you're facilitating conversations around worldviews and so forth. So why don't you answer that, honey?
well, I would start off by saying I think at the very like the subtext level maybe is, I think in a lot of these conversations that we have regarding what kids and young adults do without adult supervision, um, in the cultures that we come from, there's a subtext that, or this baseline understanding that for some reason, kids and young adults will make bad decisions. And I think that that is something that is very prevalent in a lot of the conversations surrounding topics like this. And I'm not saying that that's what you're implying, but I think that that is always a part of the conversation. And my experience has been very different, strictly different. Um, we, like my mom said at the very beginning of this conversation, we basically approached education and even our parenting style, or her parenting style of me, as radical unschooling. And so there was a lot of opportunity for me to interact and with children and kids without adult supervision. Of course, it was in a safe way, but I think that that element is really important. I think that to some degree, kids need to feel some kind of responsibility over themselves and some kind of autonomy that isn't dependent on, you know, their parents hovering over them and seeing results. So I do think kids actually can expand and kids can grow. And even when kids come into conflict with other kids, right? I think that is also still an opportunity for growth, because then you come into all of these interesting conversations like, you know, how do you resolve conflict? How do you go for damage control? How do you tend to those relationships? So I think that that actually is inherently a pretty good thing, so long as it's, you know, it's done in a safe way. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Miro, you want to talk a little bit? I'm going to put the link in about our teen meetups, our free teen meetups that we've been doing on Thursdays and Saturdays. And I'm just going to drop the link in. It's free. So it's been our way of giving back and creating an international gathering that's safe and in the spirit of play.
Mm. Yeah, so I mean, that's really basically it. We basically just facilitate a space for teens and young adults to meet other like-minded teens and young adults. And the very first part of that group usually has something to do with some kind of philosophical or hypothetical conversation where we explore something that is relevant to all of us, that is relevant to the world that we live in. And then the second half of that usually is very entrenched in play. And I mean, that's something that, you know, has been very well documented, that play is a very valuable educational tool. I mean, if you look at like the works of Peter Gray and, you know, all that. So that is something that we also employ, not only in our online groups, but we use a lot of play in our day-to-day lives when we facilitate our teen retreats. When I work with kids online, I mean, that's basically how you maintain people's interest and make sure they have that buy-in.
And you work with younger kids too.
I work with younger kids online, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a question from Thousand Limb. You're asking us to share a glimpse of our daily life, of what a trip looks like when we visit a new place. Are you asking about like on our organized teen retreats, or just in our general life?
And I can answer Kathy, and I can share a little bit more about my Worldschooling club. I work with a company called Galileo, and they're basically an online school that functions, in some ways they're essentially somewhat similar to an online democratic school, in that they function on a like voluntary basis, where kids who are a part of the program have a number of clubs and programs laid out for them, and they're not forced to participate in any of them, but the ones that they're interested in. And one of those clubs is one that I offer, which is called the Global Citizen Club. And in it, we have this open-ended discussions We have, you know, challenges that we put aside, like let's explore this culture today, and all that. And not only is it a great space and opportunity for kids to start having those conversations, but it's also a place for them to be heard and for their ideas to be heard and for them to feel as though they are valid and the things that they believe are valid. So that's kind of the space that I strive to create. Just this last Wednesday, we talked about the specific effects that travel can have on a local culture, and we talked about, you know, some of the positives. We talked about some of the negatives, and I think that starting those conversations really early is important. Just get those cogs turning. Start thinking about that stuff. So that's what I do.
I have a question that there's a question I'm going to answer from Danielle, but before I do, can you continue, Miro? Because remember the question before was about what happens when you put kids together from other cultures that
Right.
don't necessarily know each other, but can you talk a little bit about like the hand gesture exercise that you did with them?
Well, I can even start by saying the groups that I run, the students are from all over the world. I have students from Africa, I have students from different parts of Asia, I have North American students, and they're all in the same groups. So that in of itself is multicultural. But my very first week that I was facilitating a group, I created a game where we basically went around the Zoom room and we did hand gestures that we all thought were inherently positive, right? Because, you know, we have this idea that the thumbs up is an affirmative, right? And, you know, there's all of these other different examples. But we had a twist to it, which was we looked at it from the perspective of another culture. And we said, oh, well, actually, in this place, the thumbs up is an offensive gesture. And we basically, you know, we created it. We started the conversation of different worldviews and how different people from different cultures might perceive something differently, even though it's, you know, the same thing. So that was a way to kind of start that conversation with kids and, you know, kind of create that understanding.
So I know we're running out of time. I want to just answer Danielle, and then I want to follow back up with Thousand Limb to answer your question. But first, Danielle asks about people actually knowing you, and she wants to know how we remain fearless. That, let me just tell you, our journey, as I said in the beginning, that we've changed into drastically different people. I was fearful when we first started traveling. But as a family, my son and I, we decided that we were going to create these 4 different foundations that were going to be our purpose and our sort of mantras as we travel for the first year. And that's all we were getting. We were only going to travel for 1 year. So we were going to say yes to everything. We were going to step outside of our comfort zone. And that meant feeling what it felt like to be in our stretch zone and recognize when we go into our panic zone, which is just outside of the stretch zone, but realize that when we're uncomfortable in our stretch zone, that gave us the opportunity to learn. So that was the second thing. We were going to question everything. And that, again, was creating the space between our perspective, our worldviews. And instead of saying, well, we always do things this way, ask why, and why can't we do it another way? And that really sort of gravitated into allowing us a space to question history. And, you know, that put us down another rabbit hole to look at the framing and the lenses that we're, you know, seeing the world through, and being discerning over history and information and so forth, politics, messaging, all that stuff. So the last one was to do everything in partnership. So we decided that our, you know, our journey together would have to be not only, yes, outside of our comfort zone, questioning everything, but we had to agree upon, or at least say, I'm not into it, but let's do it anyway, and I'm doing this for you because that's what the partnership looks like. So those were the things that we decided on, and through those intentional decisions, it allowed us to face stuff like fears. And again, being very fearful when we first stepped out, we now have the language or the lenses to process these things through and be vulnerable and be articulate with one another and really understand from a personal development. Because like, again, if we're asking to separate education from the person, it doesn't exist, right? We're talking about, it's a process, it's everything's integrated, you know, life is integrated and we're learning, so that's the education. And part of that is the vehicle that we're using, which is our self, to process and have these experiences. So I grew as a human being from an, you know, an intellectual, emotional, spiritual being, but that meant that that's because I was learning, and all of this was a learning process. We are lifelong learners together. So I've done all kinds of workshops. I mean, I've hosted all kinds of workshops on strategies to, you know, address and deal with your fear. And if that's something that you're really interested in, I totally invite you to send me a message and I could help you or point you in the right direction or whatever it is that I can do. But that's something that I'm really passionate about because it was a huge problem with me, especially the first year. And then to follow up with, I hope that answers your question. And then Thousand Limb wants to know what our daily life looks like when we visit a new place. So, I mean, on a retreat, obviously it's planned because we've done the time and the work to facilitate an experience based on, you know, the overall experience. But go ahead, Miro.
I'm going to interject, and you can go right back after, but I'm going to interject first and say, I think another thing that needs to be mentioned for this answer to make sense is that we slow travel, is that because we don't have, you know, a time restraint, basically, when we're traveling, we have also slowed down a lot. We prefer to spend a month at least in a place instead of just visiting for a week, right? And so we really have, I would say, a greater amount of time to organically settle into the rhythm of the place, because it is difficult when you visit a place for maybe a week or two to really find what the rhythm is, you know, figure that out. So that is something that I think also needs to be pointed out before my mom answers the question.
I would say it's based on our passions. We mentioned earlier that our passion is the foundation of the tools that we use for our deep dives or our rabbit hole explorations that you can do as families. So when we go to a place, I'm looking at archaeology, I'm looking at anthropology, and I'm looking at art. Those are the things that just light me up. Miro at one point used to look at like farming and horticulture and permaculture and ethnobotany and things like that, things surrounding plants, which I had no interest in. But that's where he would go. And so I would go with him. He would come with me, and wherever we found in the middle. And you can do the same thing in partnership from your living room. But, you know, as a parent, you know, some of you here are educators, some of you are parents with young children, and some of you are like me with grown children now. We are, as human beings, always learning. And to separate education to just the children, to an act that the children do, is such a farce to being alive. To me, you know, I can't stress enough. Every single day I learn something. I can't help but to learn something. So why not be intentional as a family and create your family culture to be a rich learning environment? And that's what travel did for us, but you can find it without travel. I just needed that separation from the, you know, the daily life because I was so involved in my work that became my everything. I needed that separation to find myself. And through that, I found, you know, what it meant to be a parent, to be a human, what it meant to be of this world and in this world. And I couldn't find those things in my normal conventional life. I just didn't know the path or even know that I had a desire to do that. Boy, I got philosophical there. If you want some more practical stuff, Miro, you chime in, because I'm the big conceptual thinker and he's the practical person. It's a good partnership. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think to talk about like what differentiates our style of existing in other places from sheer tourism, right? That would just be the time and the intentionality. We quickly kind of adapted a philosophy of visiting places as visiting locals rather than as tourists. So we always try to integrate ourselves in local neighborhoods and simply live as the locals do. And by extension, we interact with all the locals. We, you know, we've had so many amazing experiences as a result of that and that approach. And we didn't really talk about it, but we've got a couple of, like, I don't want to say catchphrases, a couple of things we always bring up in like the different talks that we do. One of those things being our philosophy of saying yes and being open to new experiences. So, and obviously that is, within reason, but we choose to say yes to most things that come up on our travels. And that has opened so many doors, both figuratively and literally, for us on our travels. So, I mean, I can think back on experiences where at our local market in Cusco, with our vendor that we've been, friends with for years, one Easter, she invited us to have Easter dinner with her family, and she opened her doors to us and said, please come and share this time with us, share this meal with us. And of course we said, yes, we would love to. It wasn't something that was within our comfort zone necessarily because, well, at least mine, because I wasn't too comfortable eating with my hands with the massive lamb on the table. But you know what? It was great.
A goat.
It was a goat. It was a great experience. Either way, we learned so much from it, and it was something that really has stuck with us. And so these kinds of experiences, they become very personal, and that is, I think, when I think back about Worldschooling, I think back about what we've done. Those are the memories that come up. So
I would also say that I've discovered in every single country we've been to and every single culture, they value families, moms, kids, and there's that kind of connection. So you as a human, you've already got some commonality. And whether they place a goat on the table in front of you with no silverware and you're like, how do I eat this thing? It just created laughter and more connection.
And an opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
To answer Shannon's question, it's very difficult right now, obviously. I mean, this is an unprecedented time in our modern human history. So I think right now, obviously, the first priority is safety. And the first priority is awareness of the consequences of our actions and of our presence in different places. So we have to put that before anything else, because as world schoolers, it's the last thing that we want to do is to have a detrimental effect on the places that we visit. And we would sooner stop world schooling or sooner stop visiting those places, I should say, than cause harm to them. So, I mean, given the current pandemic situation, it is complicating a lot of things, but I think it's complicating everything for everyone. I mean, it's been a part of everybody's experience for the last few months. So, that's just kind of a tricky situation, but that's where we're at.
I just put 2 links in the chat. We have a Facebook community called We Are World Schoolers, and do find that. Feel free to join us on Facebook. We're also launching our website, which is a membership site, on July 3rd, where we have over 150 resource articles. We're developing master classes and mini courses, and it's really an extension of community if you are interested in pursuing world schooling or being supported, or if you're a teacher and you want to connect with our world schooling community, please do just send me a message, and maybe you could do a mini course for our community if you feel like you've got something that you want to share as well.
Definitely.
So it's
Part of the reason, sorry to cut you off, but part of the reason we're so passionate about creating resources like this and communities like this is because when we started, this didn't exist, right? We didn't have access to these things, and these are the kind of things that we were looking for. And so, you know, years down the road, this is kind of our way of giving back to the community, and yeah.
And also stressing that you can world school from a stationary place. Like you can, and there are so many resources on just how to do that. Yeah. The final thing that I would say to you is we are not experts on world schooling, and that may shock you at the end of this hour-long conversation. We're not experts on anything. We are just a family who has traveled down this path, and we have our own experiences, and we're willing to share. But really, it's a community. If you're interested in this, the community itself has all of the different tentacles of information that you can utilize as your own. Don't take it from one family. Don't expect one family to lead you. It's about sharing, collaborating, and supporting one another, especially when you're venturing in an area that, like, philosophically, I'm not saying country wise, if you're philosophically entering into an area of unknown for yourself. Yeah. Any final thoughts, Miro?
I mean, I think you covered it just about.
Any,
We have gone over a little bit, so.
yeah, we have. Sorry
No.
about that, guys. Any other questions? Do feel free. We're accessible. Get a hold of us either through Facebook or through Project
Email
World School or Project World School Family Summit or the We Are World Schoolers site or Facebook group. Okay, guys, you guys are all silent.
Okay, thank
Very
you.
much.
Thank you. I hope that was of value. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Okay.
Okay, guys, thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you. All
Thank you
right,
all.
take care.
See
Bye.
ya.
Alex, thank you for co-hosting with us. I appreciate that, letting people in.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm a word nut. I just want to share one of my favorite. I discovered one of the original meanings of the word beauty going back to like Homer.
Okay.
Beauty is usually like an object today, but beauty originally has the sense of meaning, the act of responding to your own calling. So when you come from your own heart and you let your inside outside and express your truth, that's beauty. So that's what the two of you are doing. And
You make me cry. Thank you.
okay, you be well. Look forward to talking to you. Check out my little video with the 5-year-olds, no adults left behind. And
I copied and pasted that, so I've got that.
I did too.
I know, it looks so interesting. Is
the
this
Dominican
mine?
descent kids, they're 5 years old, New York City kids, and they put the basics of life together in 30 seconds, better than any politician on television, just to celebrate the 5-year-olds. They said, my wish for the world would be that everybody should get along together, that people should share, everybody should be friends, people should help each other, and that everybody should stop fighting. 5 years old. And then they go like this and they say the title, it's a little cute, and they say, no adults left behind. So, okay.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
All
Take
right.
care.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Vera. We'll see.
This has been really good, and I look forward to talking to you more. I think I have your email, don't I?
I think so. We're connected on Facebook.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
so.
I want to send something to you, but the emails are on that. Put your
Easy.
email on there right now.
Here it is. It's info at Project World School.
Okay, good.
Easy. Yeah.
I want you to read something that I just received that I think you'll be interested in. So
Thank you. I'd be
yeah,
honored.
we'll get to know each other much better.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Miro, apparently Malaysia has a lot of hand eating too. That's what Surani
Ooh.
said. We have friends in Malaysia. That's where Si Ming is. Yeah?
Mhm.
Malaysia. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. I guess we'll go. Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye. It's
We'll
been
see
great.
you soon.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yep. See ya.